want to do a little introductions. How many of you own rental properties? Okay, wonderful. One of the things I don't like about rental property is three things: tenant, toilet, and trash. As we get older, this is the problem. If we get older, we don't have the energy or stamina to take care of some of these tenants. So Delaware Statutory Trust was some of the vehicles I had thought about because I'm getting older every day and I don't want to deal with the tenants anymore. So this is one of the vehicles that we can transfer our property to our children. And sometimes they don't even want to deal with what you have done. So DST is wonderful when you talk about property diversification, tax deferral, and you have got professional management companies such as them to help you continue your legacy. So it's a great way to learn a little bit about the process. And I hope you have got rental property, great. If you've got clients who are interested in this type of vehicle, talk to K Property. Before I introduce the speakers, I want to give you a little bit about his bio. The Che Lepin is a founding member and general partner for Cove Management. He plays an integral part of the firm's success in raising more than $166 million and sponsoring nearly $1 billion DST transactions. So the gentleman has some experience. Che is a leader and specialist within the 1031 DST and real estate offering market conditions. Additionally, Chase has sponsored and co-sponsored the syndication of over 2 million square foot of DST property in the multifamily, net lease, industrial, and office sectors, as well as invested in and operated multiple net lease assets and residential property throughout the United States. Chase is regularly featured in industry publications including Forbes, Kiplinger, Real Asset Advisor, Yahoo Finance and Market Watch. A graduate of the UCLA, Che was a 4 times academic All-American water polo athlete. I can't tell the guy is too fat. I don't know how he can swim. And recipient of the prestigious UCLA Athletic Department. Now this is important. Most Courageous and Character Award. I wish I get something like that. Che was a top-ranked United States performer and represent United States in the 2012, listen to this, London Olympic Games. So he's an Olympian on the U.S. men's national water polo team. I like go fishing. I hope the boat will stay afloat. If the boat sinks, I'll call Che. Without further ado, let's give a big warm welcome to Mr. Che.
So, can you guys hear me? I'm sure I could talk loud enough. This is just for recording in the Zoom, I think. Well, I appreciate you guys giving time to our firm to just kind of educate you on what we do. Is anybody familiar with the DST in general? Or is this kind of a new vehicle for most? And how about the 1031 exchange? Okay, so everybody kind of has a grasp on that. So I'll skip, but I do want you guys, feel free to interrupt me. You know, we got I like these small groups because we can make it more conversational. It doesn't, although I have this, will kind of flow. We don't necessarily need to go through every single slide. Just some housekeeping items real fast. You know, this program or the DST properties, they're available only to accredited investors. So whether it's yourself and or if you're talking to one of your clients, the high level of what an accredited investor is, it's not necessarily like a certificate by any means. It's just that the investor has a net worth of $1 million or more minus their primary residence. If they are investing through an entity, like let's say they have a partnership or an LLC or a trust, it's just all the underlying owners are accredited and or the actual entity itself might have more than $5 million of assets. So we can go either direction because sometimes you might have an LLC for, you know, a single family that's 800,000. So just want to do that. The second thing, you know, we are not here to provide any tax advice or legal advice because every single person's situation is different, right? So we can give you the scope. So if you guys have questions regarding the 1031 exchange, we will always provide you a high level answer and provide you the information to take back to your CPA or your attorney, right? Or you can have them contact us and we're happy to conversate from that perspective. So just a quick overview. I know that in the intro, we discussed it, but our firm, we're located in Torrance. So, not too far from here. We have about 40 people at our headquarters there, doing different operations and advisory teams. And then we have some offices throughout the country. So we operate in all 50 states. I think we have property in 33 or 32 states at this point in time. And so really, that allows us to get exposure, especially in these different market conditions, right? Because every single state or local city or municipality, we go through different cycles for different reasons, whether it's economical, political, or whatever it might be. And that's where we found, and I'll dive into our vehicle being a potential advantage versus a single asset ownership, because we have diversification. We can't ever predict what's going to go on here versus, Texas or Georgia or the East Coast or wherever it is. And so by having that diversified approach that I'll dive into in real estate investing, can potentially insulate that risk on your actual underlying assets. And so just real fast just in case, I know there's people that will be on the Zoom, I'm going to do a quick overview of the 1031 exchange, even though I know you guys are familiar. But just, I like this slide just for the 5 basic rules. So the first one, which I've seen even experienced situations, this slip is if you are going to do a 1031 exchange or you have a client that's going to do one, the most important thing is setting up that qualified intermediary account or the accommodator. Most escrow companies will have one. We are not an accommodator. We can help you set those up through someone else, but you want to have that set up before the close of escrow, because if you or your clients take constructive receipt of those funds, you essentially have a failed 1031 exchange. So a taxable event, right? So set that up. It's usually very inexpensive. I think it's like $800 to $1,500, depending on where you go. The second rule that the IRS, this is all assuming that you guys want to have a full tax deferral. You can, whether it's you or your clients, if they want to get chips off the table, you can do a partial 1031 exchange. So you sell for $1 million or $2 million, whatever it is. You can decide to take a couple $100,000 or whatever it is and pay your prorated tax, talk to your CPA to see what that is, and enjoy that piece for whatever you want to enjoy it with, and then do a 1031 exchange for the primary, right? Or the remainder. And so, but if you wanted a full tax deferral, you got to reinvest 100% of the net proceeds. The second is or the third on the slide is you have to buy equal or greater of what you sold for. So this is where some confusion sometimes happens. So say you sell for, just random example, $2 million. Well, and it was all debt free. So your client or yourself, you have $2 million sitting in that QI account. Some people think that, oh, if I go get a loan for $1 million, I can then only take $1 million of my money in the QI account and buy $2 million of property, right? $1 million of the debt, $1 million of the equity. And then I can just take my other $1 million and go, do what I want with it because I covered the equal or greater purchase. But that's why I put the number 2 piece there, that you have to invest 100% of those net proceeds. I'll dive into debt in a little bit because some people, you might sell a property and there is a mortgage on it. So part of your proceeds wants to pay the bank off. And so how do you get back to buy equal or greater? You're probably going to have to take on another loan, or you're going to have to add in cash to the exchange, right? We can help you with that on that front, which I'll dive into in a second. The fourth is probably the most vital out of the whole situation, which is you have to identify what you're going to do with your funds within 45 days of that closing of the relinquished property. So the property you sold, that day it closes and money is being wired to the escrow team, you have 45 days, a month and a half, plus or minus, right? That can go really fast because unless you're ahead of the game and negotiating some sort of contract before you close on your property, you're going to have to go out, put offers on properties. If it's non-residential, those take a little longer because you usually have to have a attorney involved on the PSA negotiation. And then you have to, once you lock in a contract, now you're having to order all your third-party reports. If you're doing anything that's like multifamily or commercial or a net lease property, you're typically going to want to order environmental reports, property condition reports, appraisals. And in that world, it's not as fast as like a single family house, right? Single family house, we could have the appraiser out and 3 days, 4 days later, they have the report back to us. This could take 2-3 weeks sometimes in the kind of commercial world, or to get the environmental report, or if you had to have soil testing. And so that 45 days, to my point, you could end up identifying something that you don't have the full clarity of due diligence yet. And then you could have a failed exchange if you're not comfortable, because once you identify your properties, you don't have any, or you can't change. Now, you might have different properties as backup strategies, but again, I've seen plenty of failed exchanges because obviously you don't want to do a 1031 exchange into something you're not comfortable with. And so I'm going to tie this into, I know there's some people here that it's your personal situation, and some people, you might have clients. And so the way that we've worked well when we're looking on the client side, if you're a realtor, is, a lot of people, I think it's a crazy stat, and I'm not going to quote it because I don't want to be incorrect, but there's a lot of single family houses that have become secondary homes and investments for people that are either sitting vacant or they're sitting with a tenant that it's just at this point in time, you might not even have a difficult tenant. It's just the high cost of running real estate nowadays, especially in a state like California. And so a lot of times when we do analysis for clients, which I'm sure you guys could do for your clients, we discover they're making 1%, cash flow after all their expenses and their rent, and they're equity trapped, meaning they might have bought it at a good price, 10, 15, 20 years ago or longer, but they're still only making a small percentage because in California or places like California, it's a kind of an appreciation play, right? They built up so much appreciation and it's gone up so fast, especially over the last, 5 years here, that the rents haven't caught up to offset, because yes, rents have gone up, but expenses have gone up 30%. I think a lot of people in the coming this year or last year are going to hit insurance increases, where that's going to eat into a ginormous piece of someone's return. And then you look at, your property taxes. People, a lot of these are, I was talking to a gentleman over here, these are older, California historically has a lot of older construction. And so now you're hitting roof replacements, AC, structural, plumbing, and all of a sudden, if you look at your client or yourself's past 5 years and all the deferred maintenance you've had to do, your return from what you've received so far, outside of your trapped equity that we were talking about, is not that great, right? Now, there is a benefit to your piece of real estate, right? You control it. What we do is a passive investment, so it's not right for everybody. But when we can take that trapped equity and exchange it, that's why people do 1031 exchanges. It's not just to be, not everybody wants to be a passive investor, and we understand that, but you might even exchange it just to get it put somewhere else into another asset that you want to control, right? To increase your, that value of that equity, increase cash flow on that. For us, everything's 100% passive. So there is no control for the investor. So you got to be comfortable with that, right? You got to be comfortable with the operator, the underlying asset, which we're there to walk you through that. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, a big potential benefit is the diversification, because you could take that single family house or 4-unit, 80-unit, 10-unit, whatever it is, strip center, and now diversify it across, 5 different DSTs, which we'll dive into, that have 5 different properties in 5 different markets in 5 different industries, or whatever the underlying asset is, to create that diversification on the cash flow. So God forbid there is something that affects a particular property, you don't feel it as a whole, and I'm not a stockbroker or a wealth advisor, but most times if you walk into a financial planning office or a wealth advisor and you have X amount of money, they're not putting you in just Google stock. Google might be great till it's not, right? They're probably diversifying, looking at your situation, and creating a balanced portfolio to meet your goals and objectives. And that's similar to what we're trying to do from a real estate perspective. And it's a neat vehicle. It's been around. I'm going to skip this slide. It's been around, the DST, as kind of full force for about 2 decades now. Back in 2004, the IRS blessed it as a like-kind vehicle in the tax code for 1031 exchanges. So a big difference between, if you guys are familiar with a partnership or an LLC, if we all were together in a partnership and investment and that property sold, if we wanted to do a 1031 exchange, we would have to all move together into the next property, because the general LLCs or partnerships don't allow, unless you convert to a TIC or something prior, to all go your own separate ways. The DST, when you come in, you can go your separate ways. So say you're invested into a FedEx distribution center. 5 years down the road, that business plan completes. We sell the FedEx for X number. You guys are not stuck in DST land. You could go do something on your own at that point. You could pay your taxes. You could do another DST, but all the different owners can go their own ways. And the reason why, or we believe the IRS blessed the DST, was for that reason, because it's not like a general partnership where there's profit sharing with the sponsor. So a sponsor is who's running the business plan on that deal. They're the trustee of the Delaware Statutory Trust. They don't make a profit share on the back end. So all the owners in that deal have an undivided beneficial ownership in that trust. So it doesn't matter if I'm a 0.5% owner and then someone over here is a 90% owner, we all get treated the same. There's no, this person gets a higher waterfall or a split on the back end. So that's unique also from a cash investment standpoint. These vehicles are not just utilized for 1031 exchanges. We have a lot of people, because real estate's expensive nowadays. It's not like 20 years ago. I had a client in the office yesterday. He was buying stuff out in the Valley, I think in the late 90s, for $50,000, $100,000. Now to enter that, you're at $2-3+ million for that same multifamily, right? So we're seeing a lot of professionals now come in that they can't, without levering to their eyeballs, they can't buy the $2-3 million property. So it's hard to enter the real estate game now for a lot of people without putting all your chips on the table. And so people will do a $50,000, $100,000 investment into a DST, because when that DST sells, they can do a 1031 exchange. And obviously the goal, no guarantees, but is to continue, just like you did with your units over the years, continue to grow that value. And so I just bring that up randomly because these aren't just for 1031 exchanges. So another thing, some people get confused on the 1031 by like-kind property. You can sell a single family house and do a 1031 exchange into an office building, industrial building, whatever it might be, as long as that building you're exchanging into is utilized for investment purposes or business use. So now we'll dive into, I'll pause for a second. Any questions? Great question. Yeah, so she had asked if, how does our distributions work in our vehicle, or how are investors paid? So all of our programs are monthly payments. They're usually paid in arrears, just because the asset management teams have to, collect rents and do all the management side of it. So usually, like, if it's we collect February rent and then we pay the February rent in March. But then you'll get on a flow where every month you're getting your payment, right? So yes, monthly payments. It's important to note your cash flow. Where's that cash flow coming from? It's coming from the tenant, right? So as we go through potential options with our investors, we'll walk you through the potential risks of that tenant, right? Whether they renew the lease, do they go out of business? If it's multifamily, they just not pay their rent. It's all the same types of risks that we all experience on our individual assets. Hopefully we could potentially insulate that by, these give access to, quote unquote, higher quality properties. What that means is they just more expensive properties, right? Like if we're investing into a distribution center with Amazon that signed a 20-year lease, in theory, it should be pretty secure as long as Amazon doesn't default on their rent. They could, though, right? We've all seen big companies do things. That's why we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. But it does create a little more stability versus, a local business. But we do have buildings with local businesses too. Yeah, absolutely. So non-owner and or held for investment purposes. Yeah. So a lot of times, what I experienced, I started my career in multifamily or small units, like anywhere from 4 to 12 units out in Los Angeles back before the 2008 cycle. And I was calling, all the owners and on the front lines. And the biggest pushback we always got was, well, I'd love to sell, but what am I going to go into? Right? I don't want to face this ginormous tax consequence. And so that's where we've been a tool in the toolbox for realtors, is just to, kind of educate them. And again, that DST might not be their primary option, but it gives them the safety of, I'm not going to necessarily have a failed exchange, if they're at least somewhat comfortable with the vehicle, right? So they still might want to sell their single family house and go buy multifamily or whatever they want to buy, but we're there as a backup strategy. I think the more unique strategy when you're talking to these owners is the cover strategy. So what I mean by that is, say you sell whatever property for $1.2 million. Well, we have to buy equal or greater, right? So what that's going to mean is that client has to find something that's exactly $1.2 million, or they're going to have to add a bunch of exchange to find, something at 1.5 or take on debt. So you could tell your clients, look, you have a little flexibility here. Maybe you do find a $1.2 million, or maybe you find a 1.3 and you add a little cash. But if you see a really good property that makes a lot of sense for you at $900,000, they can buy that on their own. And then the leftover funds, they can use our product to cover the delta, right? Cover that spread so they can have a full tax deferral. So you don't have to go all into DSTs. The IRS cares about the aggregate or the total, once you close out the exchange. So I'm going to go high level on this for you. But we have we call it a PPM, but a private placement memorandum. And in there, we'll have has all the details, right? From the actual asset, but more importantly to your question, it'll lay out the outline of any costs and fees. It is built into it, the offering. So when you do look at a property, and if it says, 5.5% return for cash flow, and you invest $1 million, you're getting 5.5 on that $1 million. Okay. So you don't need to back out a fee because we've built that into the mix. Now the fees are there. So part of our process and requirement is to walk you through what those are. But just so you know, when you're looking at, sometimes investors they'll see there's like an asset management fee of 1%, and they'll start backing it out of the cash flow that they see. We've already included that into the picture. But I'm happy, I'll give you guys my card. And if anybody just wants to see an example PPM, I can email one to you and kind of walk you through it. Yeah. Yeah. So at the end of the year, I can also give you guys an example. We call it like a tax package, but the asset management team the sponsor, the trustee, will usually around February or March, we'll start getting you guys tax packages, which is going to break down everything that went on at that property, any potential expenses. And it'll be plugged into your Schedule E, just like you're doing your current real estate. And so, like if it's a multifamily deal, what it's going to show is the gross income, probably like if you have a professional management company, they send you something like this, but gross income and then all the different expenses. So you can net out to get to match your net income of what you received. You will also get, and this depends on each individual situation, but you still get depreciation potential on these. So this is real estate. Everything's treated. I always tell people, from generally speaking, any questions on the DSTs in terms of like how they operate from a tax perspective, it's almost identical to the same way that it operates on your own real estate. It's all flowing through that Schedule E. But if you have depreciation left, depreciation carries forward. Okay. So A lot of investors don't have depreciation if they've owned it for a very long time. You know, if you've owned it for over 27 years or 30, 39 years on commercial, then you don't have depreciation. But if you did have some left, it'll carry forward. And in our tax package, we'll break down the land and building value so that you guys or your CPAs can take that and, you know, calculate that in the picture. Now, with that said, if you come to us and you're fully depleted is kind of the terminology, meaning you've done all of your depreciation schedule. There is a way to get more depreciation. You have to take on a little risk to get it, but that's taking on debt. So if you show up to us, and a lot of times if you're fully depleted, that means you've probably owned it for a long time. You probably are debt free. You've probably paid down your mortgage, unless you've done refis or something, but you probably paid down your mortgage. So you show up, you're debt free, you have this $1 million and you're fully depleted. Well, we could go into a DST that has a 50% loan to value because some of our DSTs will have a debt structure on them. So investing that $1 million into that property just bought you $2 million, right? 50% equity, 50% debt in my example. The extra $1 million of property, fresh property, right? Because you went from owning $1 million to $2 million, that extra $1 million, that is a new schedule. So that will give you a new chunk of depreciation. So that is for some people that are willing to take on a little risk, take on debt, that's a strategy, right? They might be 1031 exchanging out of this property, not because the property was bad, not because the tenants were bad. It's not tax efficient anymore. So they might look to, you know, up, and that's how people kind of historically have grown the wealth. We'll walk you through what those risks are, right? I would say the debt and the DSTs can be arguably a little less risky than putting debt on your own property because you don't need to sign on these loan documents. You just get the pass-through benefit of it. You have your risk of your equity in that deal, but again, you're not signing on carve-outs in the loans. You're not doing personal guarantees on the loan. You don't have to deal with the lender. You're not going to do loan documents. So it's a very easy, you know, if you're comfortable with whatever that asset class is and the debt on there, it's a way to do it. I always recommend if your CPA has a strategy for that you don't go all into that strategy, right? Maybe you take on a little debt and then the remainder, so you just lever up a little bit. But of course, we can dive into that. So moving on, some of this because I am just flowing. Was that all the questions until we move forward? Okay. So as I mentioned, the actual revenue ruling here is the IRC revenue ruling 2004-86. Prior to that, from my understanding, before the IRS actually blessed it, they were structuring DSTs out there, institutions were, but they were doing them on kind of private letter rulings, kind of getting a one-off permission or a letter to support what they were doing. And then that enough people do that, it kind of turns into a potential revenue ruling. So some quick questions on the DSTs. Again, a DST is just the umbrella. So think of your family trust, right? A lot of people, even their own homes, like if you looked up my address, it wouldn't be Shay that owned my house, right? It would be my family trust that owned the house. But then there's beneficial owners that own that trust, which happen to be my wife and myself. So same concept. It's just a wrapper around the real estate, this DST. But the most important thing is what is inside that wrapper, right? And so I'll give some examples, but that's the real estate. So it's not this open-ended like a complex where they're raising money and going to go buy, you know, this type of property. The property exists. You can look at it, wrap your mind around it, and it's not going to change outside of that property selling in the future. So you know what you're getting into today, right? It's not a real estate fund, again, where we raise money and go out and hopefully complete something. These are prepackaged. They're closed into the DST before you guys invest. So there's, again, not that risk of you thinking you're investing into something and then they can't close on the property. So because they're prepackaged, day one, you have access or your clients have access to all that due diligence that I talked about because they've already done all of that to tee it up in files for you to review and for us to walk you through. And so that means if you decided this is right for me, or this, I like this property, you can close on these in 3 to 5 business days. So it really, a lot of our clients will pre-plan before they get in their 45 days, so that if when you close 3 to 5 business days, you're closing into the DSTs and creating your cash flow, because you'll start getting your potential cash flow pro rata for whatever day you close in that month. For us in the DST world, so again, a sponsor is the institution that creates the real estate. We are unique where K Properties and Investments is a platform that represents, kind of like if you're a realtor, you have the listing, right, that you might be selling. We have different, you know, quote unquote listings of different sponsors or institutions that they don't raise capital directly from the public. And some of that's regulatory. So they go through firms like ourselves. So we have, depending on, you know, activity from them, we work with, you know, 40 to 50 plus operators. Some of these operators are very large operators that you might know of, you know, from the public world, which I can send you guys a list. And some are, they're all large, and some are, you know, maybe not recognizable. But what I was arriving is our core asset classes is multifamily, net lease properties, healthcare, self-storage, industrial properties, some multi-tenant retail, generally usually essential retail like grocery anchored centers and or Walmart anchored, that type of stuff. We also are unique that we do have a sponsor. We're a different company where we're a trustee. So sometimes they are our own deals, full disclosure. But we, as you've heard me say, we're about diversification. So that's why we don't just sell our own listings, right? We represent because we want to create a diversified approach for our clients. So I'll go through some just quick examples, not a lot here. But you know, this was a multifamily new construction deal that we had done. These are all closed out just because we have some regulatory requirements before we could show, you know, live deals. But these are closed out deals that our investors went into. This was a debt-free deal, multifamily out in the Nashville market. We do stuff, we love, you know, kind of small industrial distribution. Some people call it last mile distribution, which is where that product is ultimately being delivered. You know, so like we do a lot of Frito-Lay, you know, so all the convenience stores, grocery stores, all the products that, you know, Frito-Lay doesn't just sell chips and Pepsi, they're owned by PepsiCo. You know, they have hundreds of brands that they distribute out on the healthy side and the unhealthy side. But very vital, you know, multi-billion-dollar company on the lease. It's industrial, so we feel that they're usually in good logistical corridors. So again, we're always trying to look at the downside risk protection. If Frito-Lay wasn't to renew this lease, I think that a lot of these are like 10-year leases, but if they weren't to renew that lease or they were to go bankrupt for whatever reason, can we re-tenant that property? Is it going to be a viable property in that market or that corridor? And so a lot of times industrial buildings, as we all know, different cities are limited on it. Some cities are more focused on it, but they're usually corridors that exist. You can't just develop industrial anywhere typically. You know, obviously they could re-entitle land and things like that, but it takes time, right? So it can arguably control supply and demand versus, I would say it's the same for any asset class, but you see a lot more like multifamily going up everywhere versus industrial deals going up everywhere, right? And so we like to have that protection. Obviously, we hope that if this type of tenant would renew and stay, and before, you know, we sell the building. Do a lot of FedEx properties. We have a handful of FedEx is actually going to launch in the next 30 to 90 days. FedEx has a couple different brands. They have FedEx Ground, FedEx Express, FedEx Air, FedEx Freight. So they all kind of focus in different segments. This is an example of a medical. Usually when we do medical, it's a larger tenant. You guys have probably seen like Fresenius, you know, dialysis. Unfortunately, there's a very large population that requires this care or need. Another brand new multifamily deal in Houston, Texas. Amazon, like I mentioned earlier, we've done the Amazon distribution centers. So the point is it's usually recognizable real estate to you guys. And there's how many people are familiar with net lease properties when I say that term, or triple net? Yeah, so those are another way to be passive, right? So if you're an owner, the only two options, if you're tired of the three T's, or your property is just being affected by outside forces that are hurting your expenses, there's only two ways to go passive. Either the DSTs, like this type of structure, or you go out and buy a triple net property for yourself, right? The problem that I see more frequently, and on my company that we manage properties where we're the trustee, we're encroaching, I think, across a chunk of our entities that are involved on the triple net side, probably close to $1 billion. And so every week, my team is dealing with all these national tenants. If you guys are interested in triple nets, they could be really good for you if you find the right property. You can come talk to me and ask me how that tenant operates, right? Because these are corporate tenants. These are Fortune 500 companies that will take advantage of, not only try to take advantage of a big company like ourselves that have lawyers and everything, they'll for sure take advantage of individual owners. So you want to be very cognizant of what you're getting into. A lot of times triple net properties are brand new to people. It's also not 100% passive. Okay. It's definitely way more passive than your multifamily deal or your single family house, because you're not having to necessarily deal, but it's very important to understand that lease. A lot of triple net properties or net lease properties still require a level of management from the landlord, and it's done on like a reimbursement. So for example, I think a couple winters ago, when we had a bad winter on the East Coast, we had several national tenants from FedEx to some others that were calling us, because we're on the West Coast. They're calling our team at 4 a.m. to get snow plows out, right? And we pay for it and we'll reimburse and get reimbursed by FedEx. But there's still those types of little management things that could come up, roof leaks. Now you're having to call someone. These triple nets aren't even in your area, and you're having to call different contractors to get bids. So there's still levels. Some are full triple nets, but I've seen a lot of corporations move away from that because they just figured out they don't want to deal with it either, right? The biggest thing though with triple nets is if you don't have $3+ million, it's hard to find a quality triple net. You're going to end up buying a franchisee that brings instability, or you're going to find something that's in the middle of nowhere. Like there's a lot of big national tenants that might be in a small little town of 5,000 people, and that's great until it's not, right? They could easily just leave that town. It's not a major MSA. And a lot of these tenants during financial, so the last 2 years, people don't like to talk about it, but I think arguably we've been in some level of a recession, at least in certain industries. And that hurts public companies, right? They're always looking at their bottom line. I've seen plenty of these triple net operators or companies that are occupying on a net lease structure. They'll leave a location or shut it down, or they call it going dark, where they still pay their rent, but they don't operate there because they're trying to cut expenses to hit a certain, on their public side, certain revenue goals. And so like you've all heard, big national tenants cut down 1,000 stores, or even we're hearing about bankruptcies now, right? Restructuring so they can get out of leases. And so that can happen in any of these national tenants. But with the DST structure, you're diversified, right? You didn't have all your eggs in that basket. You still got the benefit. People like triple nets because also you generally have a stable income stream coming through, and you don't get as affected by inflation because you're passing all the expense through to the tenant. But the over concentration is where I think a lot of people are going to get hurt in the coming years. It's expensive. So when a national tenant renews their lease, it's not always as simple as, hey, I'm taking my lease option. They're going to try to renegotiate with you. They have real estate departments with guys like myself, right? Where they know how to work with the landlords and negotiate. So what they're going to, or they hire the big JLL or CBREs to go out and negotiate with the landlords. Now you're going to have to pay that JLL broker or that CBRE a leasing commission to renew. Because usually if they like the location, they're not just going to go into the option. A lot of options and leases are fair market value. And usually after 10 years, the fair market value has gone up from what they initially signed. So they're going to try to, if they like the location, they're going to come to you in year 8 or 9 and try to do another extension, but not, get the higher rent. They're going to ask you to do some repairs because they know that if they leave that building, you just lost half your value until you re-tenant that building. And it could take you 15, 18 months to re-tenant a commercial space. And then all the TIs for the new tenant as well. So sorry to make that long drawn out. Any questions on net lease properties in general? So typically our investment minimum is $100,000. We can go lower. Most sponsors just do that so they don't have too many investors in a deal because it becomes a accounting nightmare. But if you wanted to diversify and you need to drop below 100, you can, or if you're a cash investor, you can go less. We have, let me skip here because we're probably, let me check the time here. We're getting close. Yeah, go ahead. If the building becomes, yes. Yeah, she's asking if once the DST business plan, sells down the line, and different deals have different lifespans, right? And they could be longer or shorter. There's not like a end date. That's important to understand. I want people to be comfortable that this is a longer term strategy. Because if it was a 5-year or 6-year business plan, but that landed in 2008 or 9, you probably don't want to be a seller if you don't have to be, right? You want the market to come back a little bit. But at that point, you will have options. You'll be told, you're not just generally told overnight. You'll be, hey, we're listing this property, so that you can start doing planning. And you could do another 1031, you could pay your taxes, or you could buy your own property at that time. So you kind of you're in the same kind of stages now before you went in there. Yes. Yeah. So absolutely the goal is to create growth, right? And we can, as you start to choose different, whether it's sponsors or asset classes, we can show you. The nice thing is the DST has been around now in a few, I think, decent cycles, right? The 2008 cycle, we had the COVID cycle, which kind of hit hard for a little bit. I know that it went gangbusters after, but there was still a period of time of hurt. And then we have this last cycle of inflation and interest rates going up. So the goal is to have staying power, right? And that's why debt generally in commercial could be a 5 or a 3, 5, 7, or 10-year loan, right? So a lot of our DSTs will have 10-year loans on them. There are somewhat shorter, but if you are going to do debt, the 10 years gives you runway, right? To hopefully hit a cycle where it's a good time to sell before that 10-year mark, because you can't rely on the refinance in 10 years. But the goal is to have appreciation. We'll walk you through track record and all that kind of stuff, just like your normal. It's just not guaranteed, right? So let me just go through here. This was kind of answers yours. And I can email you guys this exact PowerPoint. So if you guys take my card after and shoot me an email, we'll email you over that. Because I know I'm kind of go freestanding here. This is appreciation, kind of ties into what you just said. So any potential appreciation on the back end after, real estate closing costs are pro rata split. So if you were a 5% owner, you get 5% of that. There are reserves in a DST. So one thing, while you're inside of a DST structure, you cannot do a capital call to investors. So the other structure out there that people are sometimes familiar with is like a tenant in common structure, where you can do a capital call inside that structure. And so a lot of times sponsors that are creating TICs or tenant in common, they don't need to bundle up a bunch of reserves, so they can juice cash flow more because they know they ultimately could go back to investors and ask them for, hey, the We didn't think the roof was going to go out and it went out, right? So everybody pitch in $10,000. With the DSTs, the sponsors try to do their best to look at that property condition report and those inspections, pre-capitalize the reserves up front for that future. So if they know they're going to have to replace a roof in 5 years from now, they've hopefully, and this is something we'll walk you through, but they'll hopefully have that $300,000 or whatever it is in a reserve. There are things where if reserves don't cover it, there's other ways to go out and get capital without having to go to the investors, or they, reduce cash flow for a period of time to cover something. But reserves are an important item to look at in a DST structure with the due diligence. We talked about taxes. You don't get a K1. This is not a partnership. Okay, so you'll get that tax package that I mentioned earlier, and it'll basically, it's like a substitute 1099 that'll show the gross rent that came in, and then you take that expense balance sheet to net it down to what you received, right? Again, if anybody wants an example of that, we're happy to send you an example tax package, a live deal that's just redacted. Real fast, we have DSTs that are debt-free. We have DSTs that have debt. Obviously, in a debt-free deal, we've mitigated a lot of risk. You don't have all those tax advantages if you're fully depreciated, but don't let the tax tail wag the dog, right? Make sure you're comfortable before levering up. So we have the debt-free deals, which for the obvious things don't have refinance risks, don't have once you take on debt, this is another thing. You might be comfortable in your stage of life right now taking on the debt, but remember, once you take that on, you're stuck in there. So if you're debt-free today and you take on a debt component, it's going to take you forever to pay that off, right? It's going to be an amortization table of 25, 30 years. So on your next exchange, you're going to continue to have to take on that debt. So you got to look not just where you're at right now in life, but also maybe 7 to 10 years from now, right? Are you going to be comfortable with that at that point? So the debt-free deals have anyone know what a cash flow sweep is? So in a lot of commercial deals, because they're usually non-recourse, right? They can't go after you personally. They have to create other protections for themselves. So this isn't just in DST world. This is all commercial real estate world. The lenders will put cash flow sweep provisions inside of their loan documents, and there'll be a trigger for that. So it could be, anyone familiar with, I think it was Dollar Tree, right? Big tenant out there. Well, they merged with Family Dollar, I think a certain amount of years ago, right? When a merger takes place or anything like that, there's usually a downgrade in a credit temporarily, right? Till they kind of figure out the merger and balance it all out. The credit agencies downgrade. In the loan documents, a lot of times with these national net lease properties, if a downgrade happens, doesn't matter if the company's still healthy, it's still paying its rent, they didn't do any store closures, it actually was a great merger. They will sweep the cash flow into what you call a lockbox, and there would be like a certain amount of quarters of it'll be in there until they get upgraded back. Could be a year or two before that happens, right? So when you're debt free, you don't have a cash flow sweep or a lockbox. So that's a benefit for not taking on debt when you get into the commercial real estate world. There's no balloon. What if your mortgage was coming due today, right? If you don't have to, you don't want to sell if you have to take on debt because you just went from a 3-4% interest rate environment to a 7% or whatever it's at today, which because of that, it eats into your net operating income, which means the bank's going to give you a lower loan to value. So you might have had a 70% loan to value when you first went in, but because the banks want to be more conservative now, they'll go, sure, we'll refinance that, but you got to pay down 20% of your loan balance before we'll refinance it. So the debt free just gives you staying power to get through the cycles. Debt deals are still fine. I'm not trying to scare you on debt. We've been involved as a company in, I think at this point, over $40 billion of offerings in the DST space, which probably more than half of that value has been in debt products. So we've seen our fair share of debt. And fortunately, knock on wood, we haven't had, crazy issues with debt. But I think where debt's affected investors is just more volatility on cash flow, going up and down and things like that. I'm going to wrap it up, but we've kind of put, 15 years plus of educational materials on our website on the KPI1031.com there. Every Wednesday, is today Wednesday? Yeah. We do a webinar every Wednesday too, just, on GoToMeeting or Zoom. So anybody can log into those. We try to switch up the subject matter every Wednesday, and then that's about an hour long like this. That's also at 11 o'clock. And then every Friday, we do a live podcast, and that's shorter, 20 to 30 minutes. And that's also generally on a different topic, or we're highlighting a property or a tenant or a hot topic in the real estate industry. We record all those, convert it to a podcast on Apple. So you can go look it up on, K Properties podcasts. And then on April 23rd, you can email me this, we have our annual investor day. That'll be down in Torrance at the Marriott Conference Center. So if you guys email me, you're welcome to, bring a guest as long as they're a accredited investor. And that'll be from, I think, noon to 6. And we're going to have many guest speakers on that from lots of different major financial institutions, some of the largest in the world, come speak at and they'll be focusing on different asset classes. Like we'll have a session on multifamily, a session on industrial, a session on the economy, different topics. So you don't have to come for the whole thing, but we'll email you the agenda, and you could pop in. We'll have a lunch and a cocktail hour after. So please, come to that kind of stuff. We try to do one a year. We do more than one a year, but a lot of times the other ones are out of state. So this is great that this time it's here in Southern California. Any other questions? Does he rent it out or no?
No.
That's yeah, or within the last 2 years.
So one of the options that I applied was, rent the house for 2 years, and then we can come back and do this for 1031.
Yeah, as long as they are renting it. Yeah. Exactly. Because right now he just has the simple deduction if he's not married but yeah, turn it into a rental. You can also, some people that have like a 4-unit or 6-unit, they occupy one of their units, they can get a pro rata deduction for their personal residence and then 1031 the rest. So there's that approach. But yeah, unfortunately, the only way would be to yeah. I mean, obviously, I don't know their situation, but if they're that low loan to value and they need cash, they could do a small, equity line or a refinance, and then turn it into an investment property and 1031 it later. So in what regard, or really is like truly a trust from Delaware or an entity. So we are actually like taking title with the entities of the DST, or the sponsor will create, the entity for that deal. So they'll give it a name, but it ultimately will be a DST entity that will hold title to that underlying real estate. So if you went and pulled one of our FedEx properties, it would be tied to the Delaware Statutory Trust entity that was formed. So it's like forming any LLC, right? Like you go to the state, form it, pay the fees, the annual fees, or whatever it might be. But the important thing for us is it owns an asset, because anybody can create a DST entity, right? You could own, like a lot of mutual funds, I think in their charters, they're DSTs, because Delaware is very business friendly historically on their entities. So it's a lot more harder, I guess, in theory, to pierce the DST entity. Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. That's a great, I should have brought that up. Yeah, so if you do go into another state that is a tax state, obviously there's tax-free states that don't, require you to file an income. You might have to file a form that says, hey, I exist here, but you're not filing income tax like in Texas or Florida, Nevada, et cetera. But if you were, say it was, South Carolina or North Carolina, you will have to pay your tax for that income in South Carolina, and then you'll get a credit here in California. So you're not going to get like necessarily double taxed per se, but you'll get a credit. So it doesn't really, outside of the extra work of your CPA or yourself, whoever's filing your taxes, it's not a big process that and we have a CFO on staff that we're not going to do your taxes, but if your CPA wants to speak the language with him, we offer that. They can get on and talk it. We've done over 9,000 DST investments every year. Right now it's tax season, right? We get less than 100 calls a year, and it's usually just, hey, a document's missing or something. So that tells me it's relatively straightforward. Obviously, if there's a question, ask it. But after the first year, it becomes a little more simple. I'm invested, I think, in 13 different states. So it's more of a concern if your client is, or your investor is already in a tax-free state, right? They're in Florida as a resident or Texas. And so now we want to be cognizant of what we're putting them into because it might cause them a bigger tax burden. But for California, we have the highest taxes. So, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon. Yeah. So there is a business plan for every deal, right? And generally they can go past 10 years. Generally it's under 10 years. Usually if it's going past 10 years, it's because it wasn't a good time to sell or something along those lines. So I think if you look at the last 2 decades, the average hold period has been around 6-7 years, plus or minus. Some have gone longer, some have gone shorter. We're going to make sure to walk you through that. We want you to be comfortable. If you need your money in 3 years from now, this isn't the vehicle, or if the investor needs it in 3 years, it's not the vehicle. But we do have strategies where maybe they are shorter term. Like everyone know what a REIT is? Like a lot of them are on the stock exchange or big companies. So some of those REITs, those, big groups create DSTs that we offer on our platform. And they're still DSTs, but they're creating the DST where their REIT is going to be the takeout buyer. So they have already kind of contractually, in a way, said, hey, to you guys as DST owners in those particular deals, in 2 to 3 years from now, we're going to buy that. And this is a whole nother session, but has anybody heard of a 721 exchange? So it's when you convert your real estate that you are an owner in and move up into a REIT. And that's like a tax deferred thing through the 721. And you get converted into OP units or operating partnership units. And so now you are part of that big REIT, right? The downside is you lose future 1031 exchange ability. So once you sell your shares of those REITs, if you do, you'll be taxed as you sell those. But some people like it for estate planning purposes. Like they know they might want to tap into their real estate and just pay tax over time. Maybe they know in, the next 5-10 years, I want to take $100,000 out every year. So it kind of can control your tax burden, because if you own just a property yourself, you can't just start selling $100,000 chunks of your own property, right? So the REIT approach can be beneficial. We just want to walk you through the potential risks of a REIT, because those can be volatile, right? They're tied not just to real estate, they're tied to the public markets and some other potential business operations that are going inside those. But we have some really large REITs available. Some REITs, though, won't force you to go into the 721. They'll give you an option, right? Like, hey, 2 years later, you could take your money and just do what we talked about earlier and do another 1031, or you can come up into this REIT with us. What do you want to do? Going back to your question, though, if let's say they were comfortable today, right? And an emergency comes up in 7 to 10 years from now that was, unpredicted, we will do everything in our power. These are sellable securities. So, there are secondary markets out there. Could potentially have to take a discount. Maybe you sell at par. I've seen it all over the board. It's going to be tied to how that underlying real estate's performing. So there are potential exits prior to the actual DST going full cycle. That's just, it's not a stock market, so it could take some time, if that makes sense.
What the average holding time for people invested in the
I would say a lot of them are around 5 to 7 years. This is stabilized real estate, right? We're not doing generally, it's not like a super value add or a development or a flip. So when you're buying real estate that's stabilized, it takes 5+ years to create your natural value. There might be some multifamily that we have where there's light value add, like maybe it's, you know, early 2000s construction and there's going to be some new amenities added over time or updates to the clubhouse and, you know, the interiors, but that's very light, right? You do that over the 5 years and maybe there could be potential value over that, but usually at least 5+ years outside of the REIT deals could be shorter, you know, 2 to 3 year hold periods. I mean, it's honestly, it can be all over the place because it depends on the business. Like there's some deals that are more income focused rather than appreciation, but we've had stuff. If you look at full cycle events across the board, they've been anywhere from 9 to 18% internal rate of returns. We have had, or the last 2 years is not necessarily a fair, or not last 2 years, maybe like 2021 to 2023 isn't a fair track record example because everybody should have been successful in real estate during that time, right? It just kept going up. But, you know, when we kind of look at the history of the last 2 decades of DSTs, you know, 9 to 13% is hopefully a target that most people are trying to get on an annualized return. And those include your cash flow and potential appreciation, right? That calculation. So yeah, but we have track records of the different sponsors that we could walk you through.